Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to talk about angles formed by parallel lines. You're going to need the green foldable I gave you in class. You're going to need two different colors to write with, and you might need a calculator. First set of angles we're going to talk about are alternate interior angles. Okay, but first, before we start, we need to figure out what my vocab means, the words we might see and what they mean. So when we're dealing with these four different types of angles, the relationships between angles, we're always talking about parallel lines. So these are only formed if we have parallel lines. So M and N are going to be your parallel lines. This other line then that cuts both of them, cuts both the parallel lines, this is what we call a transversal. So the transversal is what cuts your two parallel lines. So that's just understanding what our vocab means. Next, I want you to grab one of your colors, and we are going to start annotating or figuring out what each of these means. So alternate interior angles, I want you to take it and I want you to highlight it, box it, whatever you got to do to kind of make it bold. This is what we're talking about. The angles between the two lines and on opposite sides of the transversal. So next I want you to underline between the two lines. And I also want you to underline opposite sides and the word transversal. Okay, make sure all of those are underlined because then we're going to go down to our picture and figure out what this means. So when we're talking about opposite sides of the transversal, you think, here's my transversal. So if I'm on the left side, the opposite would be the right. Okay, so that's the first thing that we need to look for. The other thing is it needs to be between the two lines. So it needs to be between M and N. So we have four numbers that are between N and M. We have 3, 4, 5, and 6. So those four numbers are between. Now which numbers, if I'm talking about, let's say 3, which number is also between the two lines but on opposite sides of the transversal? I hope we're thinking 6 because we only have options 3 and 4. Now we're not choosing 4 because we want alternate to be on opposite sides of the transversal, but we also want them to be touching different lines. So 3 is touching line M, and 6 is touching line N. Okay, but we have another set of alternate interior angles. So if you grab another color, the other set of alternate interior angles, if we're looking at number 5 here, 4 is on the opposite side of the transversal and it's still between. So the reason I had you grab two different colors is because we're going to have multiple sets of these angles. So we have two sets of alternate interior. Remember, they're on inside of the lines and they're on opposite sides of the transversal. Okay, the next thing we got to take note of, the next thing I want us to highlight, underline, box out is alternate interior angles are congruent. So what does this mean? Again, remember, congruent just means equal. Our sign for congruent is this, but it just means that they're equal to each other. So measure of angle 3 is congruent to the measure of angle 6. And so on and so forth. Measure of angle 4 is congruent to the measure of angle 5. So those are the two things, or the three things I suppose we need to take away from alternate interior angles. So let's try this first example. Find the value of x given that M is parallel to N. Okay, so thinking they're on the inside, these two angles are on the inside of my parallel lines, opposite sides of the transversal. That's going to be the alternate interior angles. Now again, remember, we know that the alternate interior angles are congruent. So when I set up an equation, I'm going to go 64 equals 2x plus 4. From here, I'm going to solve for x. I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides to get 60 equals 2x. My final step would be to divide by 2. So 30 equals x. Now, did I have to find anything else? No. So x equals 30 would be my final answer. Remember, if you have questions, make sure you jot them down on the side so we can discuss them tomorrow. My next set of angles are pretty much very similar to the last ones we talked about, except now we're talking about alternate exterior angles. The only difference from alternate interior and alternate exterior is interior and exterior. Interior was inside, so exterior is going to be outside the two lines. So let's underline that. Outside the two lines, and the other thing I want you to underline is opposite sides of the transversal. So again, very similar, but instead this time they are on the outside of the two lines. They have to be outside of M and N. So the numbers we're dealing with this time are 1, 2, 7, and 8. When I talk about measure of angle 1, okay, it's on the outside of the line. Now, opposite of that would be 8. Remember, they have to each touch the line. They have to touch, one has to be touching line M and one has to be touching line N. So 1 and 8 are both outside of my parallel lines and they're on opposite sides of that transversal. So now what is the other pair I have? 2 and 7. So making sure that we circle those in different colors in our notes, that way we can determine the difference. Again, looking at how these two relate, alternate exterior angles are congruent. Underline that, box that out. Again, what does congruent mean? Congruent means equal. So when we're talking about angle 1, it is congruent to angle 8. And angle 2 is congruent to angle 7. So looking over here at my example, we just need to find the value of x. We know that M and N are parallel. So we're talking about two angles that are outside of M and N. They're on the outside of M and they're on opposite sides of the transversal. So this means that they're alternate exterior angles. So again, 6x plus 10. We know alternate exterior angles are congruent, so it equals 4x plus 24. The hardest part about these problems is setting up the problem. Understanding the words, understanding the relationship between the angles, and then setting up a problem. From here, we can solve algebraically. Subtract 4x from both sides. 2x plus 10 equals 24. Subtract 10 from both sides. 2x equals 14. Divide by 2, x is going to equal 7. Now again, is this the only thing we were trying to find? Are we trying to find an angle measure? Nope, in this example, it just has me find x, which is 7. So my example then would be complete. The next type of angles we're going to talk about are corresponding angles. So again, if you need to box or bold the title, corresponding. Okay, let's talk about what that is. Angles that are on the same side of the transversal, so either both on the left or both on the right, and both above or below the line. So things I want you to underline in this sentence are same side of the transversal. And I also want you to underline both above or below the lines. So make sure those are the things that we're pulling out when they're corresponding angles. This is what we're understanding corresponding angles to be. So grab your colors. So we're thinking same side of the transversal. So numbers that are on either the left or numbers that are just on the right. So the numbers solely on the left of the transversal are 1, 3, 5, and 7. Okay, so those are the numbers we're first talking about. Now, corresponding angles also have to either be both above the parallel lines or both below. So when I'm talking about 1 is above M, and the number on the left side of the transversal that's also above N would be 5. So 1 and 5 would be my first set of corresponding angles. Okay, now another set, if we're still talking about the left, if we look at the number 3, that is below line M. So another number that's below line N on the same side of 3 would be 7. So 3 and 7 would be another set of corresponding angles. Now if you notice, I've only talked about the left side of the transversal. So in this example, we have 4 total sets of corresponding angles. So if we're going to the right side of the transversal, looking at number 2 here, 2 is above line M, and 6 is also above line N. So that would be my third set of corresponding angles. And lastly, if I look at the number 4 here, 4 is below line M on the right side, and 8 is below line N on the right side. So those would be another set of corresponding angles. Now, when we talk about corresponding angles, the way they relate is they are congruent. So again, congruent means equal. So when I write these out, angle 1 is congruent to angle 5. Angle 2 is congruent to angle 6. Angle 3 is congruent to angle 7. And angle 4 is congruent to angle 8. So going over to my picture here, we notice that both of these angles that we're referring to are on the left side of the transversal, and the top one is below M and the bottom one is below N. So they're both on the left-hand side and they're both below their parallel lines. Now, so these angles are corresponding angles. So when I go and write an equation, I'd write 6x plus 10. How do corresponding angles relate? Well, they're congruent. So that means they are equal. So equals 4x plus 30. Let's subtract 4x from both sides. 2x plus 10 equals 30. Subtract 10 from both sides. 2x equals 20. Divide by 2, divide by 2. X is going to equal 10. So I found x. That's all I was supposed to find. X. Find the value of x given that m is parallel to n. So yep, we found x. So this example would be done. The last set of angles we're going to talk about are consecutive interior angles. So again, just thinking of the word interior, we can assume that we're talking inside the parallel lines. So again, you have to, oops, I drew that right through the name. You have to bold the name to know which one we're talking about. So these angles, the definition of consecutive interior angles, are angles that are on the same side of the transversal and between the lines. So the words I want you to underline are same side of the transversal, and I also want you to underline between the lines. So same side of the transversal means they're both on the left or they're both on the right. Okay, now they also have to be between the lines. So the only numbers we see that are between the lines would be 3, 4, 5, and 6. So if we start with 3, in order to be consecutive interior angles, they have to be on the same side of the transversal and between the lines. So between the lines, you only have 3 other options, 4, 5, 6. And if they have to be on the same side, so they both have to be on the left or they both have to be on the right of the transversal, the only number that's between the lines on the left-hand side with 3 would be 5. So our first set of consecutive interior angles would be 3 and 5. So let's look on the right side of the transversal. They have to be between the parallel lines, looking at 4, and both on the right side of the transversal. So 4, and the only other number between the lines would be 6. So here, consecutive interior angles, I only have 2 pairs. So when I write this, we need to understand the relationship between consecutive interior angles. So if we read the next bullet, consecutive interior angles are supplementary. Bold that, circle it, whatever you got to do, so that when you look back at your notes, you know exactly how consecutive interior angles relate. But what does supplementary mean? I hope we're thinking that it has a sum of 180 degrees. Okay, so this means that the measure of angle 3 plus the measure of angle 5 should equal 180 degrees. That is what it means to be supplementary. Again, the measure of angle 4 plus the measure of angle 6 equals 180. Now going over to my example. Okay, these are both on the right side of the transversal and they're between my parallel lines. They're going to be consecutive interior angles. Remember, consecutive interior angles add up to equal 180 degrees. So I'm going to write 3x plus 5 plus 2x plus 15 equals 180. That is what it means to be supplementary, and that is how consecutive interior angles relate. So next I want to combine like terms to get 5x plus 20 equals 180. Okay, now I need to solve for x and get x alone, so first step would be to subtract 20. So 5x equals 160. To get x alone, we divide both sides by 5. So x is going to equal 32. Remember, check to see what I need to find. I was only asked to find x. Now that I found x, my example would be done. I thank you for taking good notes. If you have any questions, make sure you star them so we can get those cleared up tomorrow in class.